Hello, I'm Johnny C. Jr., President and CEO of SHRM, the Society for Human Resource Management. Welcome to the third of our four-part Together Forward Conversation series, bringing you the most dynamic speakers from the SHRM Speakers Bureau to address the critical issues being faced as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and the greater calls for a more fair and just American society. After the tragic murder of George Floyd last May, SHRM launched Together Forward at Work, a new platform that aims to drive racial injustice and inequity out of America's workplaces. As part of this effort, we convened a Blue Ribbon Commission on Racial Equity. It's a coalition of business executives and academics that will study and make recommendations for actions, not just words, and solutions that will positively change the workplace experience for Black and other people of color. But HR alone cannot erase inequity in workplaces. We must listen to and work more closely with those committed to safe, civil, and positive workplace culture. But let's not be mistaken. HR still plays a huge role in moving the ball forward to ensure that our country's workplaces are safe, they're welcoming, and thriving for all, no matter their age, gender, race, ethnicity, age, background, or zip code. So join me today in a conversation with Denise Graziano. I really like Denise. I've known her for several years now, a leading authority in helping leaders create change, improve trust, and use communication to increase revenue, retention, and loyalty. Yes, we do all of this for business, right? Good business. Also joining us is Anton Gunn, former senior advisor to President Barack Obama and one of the world's leading authorities on socially conscious leadership. Anton and Denise, welcome.
Great to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here today. Human Resources has the ability, and in fact, I would argue the responsibility, to solve significant workplace equity issues. The reality is that without action and accountability, diversity, equity, and inclusion are simply words, right? To get us started, let's talk about tools that HR leaders can use to make their workplaces more inclusive and welcoming for all employees. So I want you to think of diversity as being similar to selecting people for a chorus who have different musical backgrounds, vocal ranges, and abilities. The inclusion piece of D&I means making sure that those different voices are heard and valued and that they contribute to the performance. When employees who are different from their colleagues are allowed to flourish, the company benefits from their ideas, their skills, and their engagement. So since we know this, I have a question for you, and I'm going to first send this to Denise. As HR professionals, we know that diversity and inclusion starts with us, right? But it doesn't end with us. It requires the entire management team working together. So what are some strategies on how to educate leaders in the organization about DE&I?
Well, I've long advocated that today's very complex challenges are not HR's alone to solve, and they require collaboration and communication across the C-suite. That's actually the topic of my book. In this case, it really comes down to education, awareness, and a comfort level in having these conversations, because for so long, it was the kind of conversation that you really wouldn't want to have. And the more it's brought to the forefront, it becomes a matter of fact part of how we do business. And it's about making sure that we are using technology tools if they're, but especially in terms of training and awareness and emotional intelligence.
So Denise, if you could follow up a little bit, one of the things that we talk about a lot is unconscious bias, conscious bias, and too often, especially as of late, it's like one group has all of the problems with their biases and the rest of us don't, right? And what do I mean? A lot of times the focus is on the biases, conscious or otherwise, of white men without acknowledging that all of us have biases, right? If certain people have their own bias against members of the LGBT community, disabled, the formerly incarcerated, older employees, right? So could you just before let's deal with this idea that DE&I is broader than just race, although we know that the country's reckoning with race is real right now, but it's broader indeed, right?
Absolutely. And I think that the power of story goes a long way to get people to realize where their shortcomings are or where they may be having this unconscious bias. very often we just don't realize it because we aren't aware of living in the other person's shoes, whether it's got to do with race, whether it's got to do with disability or anything. So when you can connect the dots to how the power of a diverse workforce affects revenue, it also is a driving factor. But I think the power of story, it makes people pause and realize, wow, I have been overlooking this my entire life. And when you connect it to a person who you maybe didn't realize what they were suffering in the shadows, it really does help to change minds.
No, fair enough. Anton, a lot of organizations have created inclusion councils or ERGs or affinity groups. They're called by a number of names, but they're groups dedicated to improving organizational inclusion. What are some of the ways that these councils can be more effective in changing organization policy? Because after all, let's face it, these aren't new. I mean, we've seen these organizations around for a very long time, yet we found ourselves here in 2020 continuing to wrestle with these issues.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question because they are not new. Employee resource groups, business resource groups, any affinity group has been in the workplace, in many places, sometimes going on 20 years now. So if you really want to advance a strategy that is focused on equity, these groups have to be more intentional in tying back to the business case in the organization. I always tell my clients, you can't fix what's wrong if you don't know what's wrong. And many times we establish resource groups for the sake of establishing resource groups, but not necessarily intending to solve the challenges that an organization might have. So I encourage resource group leaders to do one thing, to really understand the business of the organization and where your particular group might be able to help your organization get a greater advantage. It's really around being included at the tables that actually make the most sense for the organization. We all know businesses are in business to make money and to stay in business. So how can you be a part of that solution and be at the table when it comes to making decisions? So I advise all resource groups to make people aware of how whatever your diversity demographic of that resource group, so whether it's young professionals, whether it's women, whether it's African-American or the LGBTQ plus community, how can you make sure that your leadership, the executives in your organization, understand the value of this particular demographic of people in your workforce, in your potential customer base, in the communities in which even your facilities exist are of value? You got to start talking about value and demonstrate that value. That's the first step to being able to fix what's wrong, is for you as an affinity group to show your leaders what they might be missing out on for not capitalizing or engaging this population or this particular demographic. I would say that's the way you can start this conversation to begin to leverage the power of the importance that difference makes in an organization to actually have a lasting impact.
Okay, Anton, let me push a little, because one of the things that we hear, feedback is, those meetings, those convenings often turn into gripe sessions, right? Now you bring together a group of people who have this common experience, and even people who didn't feel that way leave the meeting saying, wow, I didn't know this was so bad or that person was so bad. What do you suggest? Because a lot of employers are increasingly a little leery about bringing these groups together, because then they have a whole new problem, right? And it's because they've turned into these gripe sessions. Talk to me about that, and let's be honest with our viewers, because I know there's someone sitting out there saying, oh, and defending it and getting ready to argue with us, but if that's the perception, then that's the reality for a lot of the business leaders.
Yeah, this is a common challenge in many organizations. And I'm going to be very honest here. This is a leadership problem. Whenever you have affinity group sessions or employee resource group sessions that turn into gripe sessions, what you're really hearing is you're hearing from a demographic of employees who may feel like, as a leader, you haven't done the fundamentals of what all leaders should be doing. And what is that? Well, there are three questions that every employee, no matter what demographic you fit, these are the three questions that every employee asks every day when they show up to work. And they're asking this to their frontline supervisor, they're asking it to the CEO, and they're even asking it to the brand of the company. And that is, do you care about me? Question number two is, will you help me? And question number three is, can I trust you? And so if you as a leader have not consistently answered that question from the day a new hire walks into new hire employee orientation to the day that they've been there celebrating their 10-year anniversary. Whenever they connect to an affinity group, it will start into a conversation around how you haven't demonstrated that you care about them, that you're willing to help them, and that you can be a trusted partner to make inclusion a reality in the workplace. So I tell leaders all of the time that this is not something you have to do one-off, or that you should be having a one-off conversation with a demographic around an affinity-based issue or communication. But every day, how do you show up as a leader to demonstrate to every one of your employees that you care about them, that you're willing to help them, and that they can trust you? And so this is a long process that starts with how you show up every morning as a leader and what you hope to do for all employees, but particularly those who want to bring their voices into the place of work that haven't been there in full before now. So I always say this goes back to a fundamental question as a leader. How are you answering those three questions with your actions and not your words?
Hear, hear. Denise, one of the most important ways to show employees that you respect their backgrounds and their traditions is to invite them to share in the workplace. Now, how do you do that in an office setting? And that might be a real office or a virtual office, but what are some ideas about allowing people to share who they are? Because we say a lot, we want people to bring their whole selves to work, but we don't necessarily give them a forum and a way to do that. Ideas?
You know, I've heard of some companies really just instituting some fun things like thematic events where you're asked to bring a little bit of your whatever background you have and to share it as a part of this group event, and everybody can learn a little bit about each other in another dimension. I mean, sometimes it can be as simple as a little bit of fun that just kind of lightens the mood and allows us to learn more about each other.
Yeah. No, and in fact, that makes it a lot better, because who wants more work? So if it's not fun, then we're like, okay, that's all I need, right? Denise, I want to follow up. Once DE&I programs, and you just explained some fun programs, some training programs, they're put into place, how can HR test and ensure that they're working for our employees? So the temptation is we oftentimes check the box. Okay, so we did that. We set up an ERG. We had a diversity day. We wrote a check to the right organization. We said and did all of the right things, but it's not working. How do we make employees feel safe from retaliation when they're having candid conversations about bias in the workplace? So 2 questions. How do you measure it? Like, how do you know that it's working? And then you talked about the importance of people feeling safe. How do you do that?
Well, with regard to the metrics matter, and it really starts with a baseline. If you don't know where you are in the various aspects of this, whether you're looking at, and it's not just one place that you look, you're looking at your employee retention, you're looking at the types of diversity that you have across the organization, you're looking at the employee engagement scores, you're looking at management in terms of their reviews, and those are the things that you must benchmark at first, so you can measure them as you go along. I think that 2 big drivers of change are going to be the fact that NASDAQ and Fortune are going to require DE&I metrics in order to be included on those bodies, whether it's the Fortune 500 list or just in NASDAQ. Because those entities are going to have metrics, I think companies are going to, 1, feel the need to take action instead of checking a box, but it may come up with some sort of a identifiable way of measuring so that everybody's measuring the same ways. With regard to safety, that really comes from policy, and that is something that I've talked about this with regard to the cancel culture and how legal counsel has to be brought in with HR to collaborate on creating policies that everybody understands what is tolerated, what is accepted, and what is not, so that there are guardrails around everything and that everyone should feel safe talking about these topics. But if there aren't policies in place that everyone knows about, and again, that goes to communication, that's where the trouble could erupt.
No, it's funny that you mentioned that, because we talk a lot about safety, and unfortunately, safety typically in a lot of circles means one group has to feel safe, and that means the other group will undoubtedly be unsafe. And that's a problem. I just finished a conversation with a group of CEOs, and they said, that's one of the problems is you can't say we're a company that has to get comfortable being uncomfortable when what you really mean is this group can be comfortable. This other group is going to be uncomfortable. And that's the way this works, because then the organization starts not to trust you. They may not talk about it because it's not appropriate now. It's not, but it gets uncomfortable. So I think that's really important when we talk about safety. Safety has to apply to everyone. We talk about just this most recent election. God, we're glad we're done with all of that, at least for now, but they're already gearing up for 2022 already. I can't believe it. But though in 2024 in some conversations, but what we've got to do is realize that, the people, half the country lost, in other words. And so, how safe is it for people to come to the office and celebrate? I remembered 4 years ago when the other half of the country lost, right? And so we just have to be very careful when we talk about safety and what that means in the context of workplace. But I want to go to Anton. I want to go back to you. Let's turn to another tricky issue. And it's the issue of inclusion when people are working remotely. So this is difficult. Because as we know, one of the biggest challenges, complaints, concerns, observations from diversity candidates, women, African Americans, Latinos, et cetera, has been, I don't have opportunities for promotion because I don't have FaceTime. I don't have an opportunity to build relationships with decision makers. Well, what happens when we're all working remotely? You have even less of a chance to run into your boss in the elevator and to strike up a conversation or to go to dinner or to go to lunch because we're all working remotely. How does the new work from home environment make the work of diversity and inclusion easier or more difficult for HR professionals? And what are some ways for us to address it?
Yeah, this is actually a great thing. I actually posted an article about this recently, that organizations have to be really intentional now, given this full-fledged virtual environment, of creating digital spaces where people can interact and build relationships with their colleagues and coworkers, and also with leaders at work. One of the things I think is really important is particularly creating the buddy system, which is how do you pair people up on projects now that no one works in silos anymore or works alone, but you create the opportunity for people to be together on a project. When you do your staff meetings, one of the things I know a lot of organizations are used to doing the 1 hour staff meeting at the beginning of the week, and then you don't see your colleagues again until the next Monday. Well, that's a failed strategy in a 100% virtual environment. You might have to change your meeting schedule to maybe a 20-minute meeting every day where you get a chance to check in with everyone every day, and use the function of breakout rooms to randomly put people in groups and give people the opportunity to connect with each other. I know you and Denise were just talking a second ago about how do you make it a little bit more inclusive. One of the things I do is show and tell with organizations, and that is everybody's Zooming from home. Everybody lives in a different place. So if you got a natural background, can you show and tell us one thing that's happening in the room that you're in that may describe who you are as a person to everyone else? This allows people to share a little bit more about themselves. And if leaders take this approach, they will open themselves up to be more authentic and more transparent with all of the team members that they lead in an organization. And you might find new relationships and new ways to connect that really can drive the opportunity for someone who might look differently, might be of a different gender identity, or sexual orientation, or different race, to connect with you in a way about something that you weren't aware of that you all had in common before, because you took the opportunity to create the space for sharing in every meeting and not just be about the business of the organization. Because we're blurring these lines between home and work, we now have to integrate our conversations about home and work in this virtual environment.
Well, as a follow-on to that, what can HR managers be doing, hiring managers, I should say in particular, and they may be HR, may not, to expand the diversity of who they recruit in our work from home environment? Because that, in some ways, the benefit is we can recruit people from anywhere. The downside is you actually now, you get to interview people. You get to see where they live. You can see how they live, what they look like. A lot of the things that the resume of times past, you could get past that. I immediately size you up when I see you on this Zoom interview. And we're seeing companies now recruit, hire, onboard everything online. Where should companies be looking, or employers more broadly, not just for-profit companies, be looking if they want to improve the candidates who are applying for jobs within their organization?
Yeah, and I would tell every organization this whole challenge around hiring and diversity is a really important challenge. And so you got to fish where the fish are. So if you think about your workforce, have you done the analytics and the data to see what would be an added value to your company or organization? Or what are you blatantly missing from your workforce? Do you not have women in leadership or other people of color in certain departments or areas? So how can you partner with organizations that do have this demographic readily available, many times looking for career opportunities? So this might create opportunities to partner with women organizations or LGBTQ organizations or the Urban League and connect with these organizations to allow you to join some of their public facing activities that they're doing remotely, that they're doing virtually, and become a sponsor or really get engaged to identify talent opportunities. I will also say the fact that you now can see people on video and see their houses and their living rooms or wherever they might be Zooming from would allow more implicit bias to come in when you think about what you want or what you don't want it as a candidate. So hiring managers, hiring leaders have to be really intentional to know that this is about attracting the best talent to my organization. This is about capturing the best and keeping the best. Because I will tell you, in this virtual environment and because of what's going on in the world, talent is at an all-time premium right now. People have choices. So what's going to make that candidate want to stick with you, and what are you going to do to be intentional about sticking with that candidate? And that is, you have to find a way to get beyond your biases and look for people for their skill set, the value that they bring, and also the diversity that they bring to your organization. These are all assets in the year 2020 and 2021.
Fair enough, and well said. Denise, let's look at the next step: reintegration and diversity, equity, and inclusion. So during the past year, America endured a global pandemic coupled with a renewed call for racial equity after the horrific murder of George Floyd. Both of these events will have an impact on reintegration. Beyond just determining what type of reintegration strategy your organization might employ, and for those who are questioning, I'm talking about people who are coming back into the physical workplace, hybrid, whatever. You must also be mindful to not put meaningful diversity and inclusion work on the back burner. So we're so focused on bringing people back that we may not focus as much about DE&I. We all know that diversity and inclusion is not just an HR issue, but it's a fundamental business issue. And I know, Denise, you talk about this a lot. That needs to include changes to systems, processes, and mindsets. What are some strategies and tools that leaders that you've developed? I know you all do an amazing job in your consultancy and in your business to help leaders make sure these themes exist in the new workplaces, that we're doing this because it's the right thing to do, but it's also very, very good for business when done properly.
Well, I think that with regard to reintegration, one of the biggest things is that we have to get everybody on board. So it can't just be from a policy down from leadership approach. It really does need to come from grassroots throughout the organization, support for these initiatives. So I think that as we all come back together, however, your company's workforce will look physically, it requires asking for their input. How could we as an organization be more inclusive? And when you get that participation and you get a little bit enthusiasm, it creates that grassroots effort that is going to blend in with the policies. And I think that can drive change, along with those drivers that we've already talked about how this connects to revenue and how it connects to outside organizations measuring progress. So I don't think it's going to be put on the back burner like some other things, like customer centricity. That was a buzzword for a while. Oh, everybody wants to be more customer centric, but not a lot changed. I don't think that will happen in this case. There's just too much emotion behind it. But I think we need to take that emotion and channel it toward action.
Well, Denise, from your lips to God's ears, I hope you're right. Anton, I'm sure will affirm me in saying this. For those of us who've been around a couple of years, you've seen 5 years ago it was Freddie Gray, and that was President Obama was in the office. Then it was, so it's from president to president. Every 3 to 5 years, the country literally goes up in flames. And we have this conversation and everyone comes with their buckets of water to put the fire out. And then we kind of go back to our same old selves. So I am so hoping that this time, not only will we truly have that reckoning with race, but that what we learn from it can be used to help us address so many other issues of workplace bias, the importance of valuing diversity, making all of that diverse workforce feel included, and then treating them equitably. Let's hope that in fact this time there's something very different. It feels palpably different, but we're not sure, and I'm hopeful nonetheless. I want to thank both of you, Anton and Denise, for joining me today for this Forward Together conversation. And I want to thank all of you all who are watching. We will see you soon on our next Forward Together conversation. Thank you so much.